All right, guys. Welcome again. Today is November 24th. We got a nice short work week ahead of us, and I just want to welcome everybody to Benchmark's USPAP Extravaganza Part 2. Just to start off, I got a couple of house cleaning issues. I know that I received speak of the devil.
There he is.
What's going on, Michael? How you doing this morning? Okay. I guess he's yeah. Okay, he's still mute. I'm still trying to get used to the fact that everybody's muted and that nobody talks back as much as they would if they weren't muted. But anyway, yeah, just to get started with some house cleaning issues. I'm glad Michael showed up because he was the one that sent me an email asking for a copy of the PowerPoint presentation from the first presentation. And what I've done is on the S drive in the server, there will be a folder called In-House Education. And then if you go in there, there will be a folder in there for USPAP Extravaganza 2020. And as I get done the PowerPoint presentations, I'm just going to throw copies in there. So if anybody wants a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, it's in there. Also, another thing is I had to re-record the first presentation. The audio, for some reason, did not catch for my microphone when I recorded it last time. So it was just about an hour of, nothing. So I went ahead and re-recorded that last night and actually uploaded that to the Benchmark YouTube channel for everybody to be able to see. So if you guys get a chance, to go on the YouTube, look up Benchmark Appraisal Group, subscribe, and hit the bell notification on the channel so that every time I upload something, you guys will automatically be notified, and I won't have to, keep telling you guys that there's new content up there.
What's it? The name of the channel?
Benchmark Appraisal Group.
It's just Benchmark. Okay, I can do it right from my phone.
And then, all right. First thing I wanted to touch base on was I was getting some feedback on the Dirty Dozen checklist. And as of right now, the feedback I was getting wasn't that positive. What we've been seeing is that people have been treating the checklist almost like boilerplate. And that wasn't the intent of the checklist. The checklist is to actually serve as a check and as almost like a self-performance quality control, where when you're done an assignment, you look over the checklist, you just double check to make sure that each of those items are in the report, and you check things off as you go along. I've been seeing times where people would check things off and they weren't even relative to the job. So you can tell that you're just checking off every box. You're making a master copy of it, and you're just throwing it in every work file because Tony says it has to be in every work file. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose. Doing this as repetition creates consistency, and it creates a good habit. And after a while, you won't need to do the checklist because those items will be basically permanently stored in your head, and it will become second nature to make sure that all those items are included in the reports, which is really important because I've already looked over jobs this week, and a couple of them had major things missing. One of them didn't even have the purpose of the appraisal written in it, and that's something that should I don't even know how it even made it out of a template, but if it made its way out of a template and then somebody uses that as a template, then that's not good. Then have multiple reports then that don't have the purpose of the appraisal included. So make sure when you're doing these checklists, make sure you're actually paying attention to it, because then over time it will just it'll become second nature, and then eventually we won't need to be doing the checklist if everybody can be consistent and making sure that all those items are included in the appraisal report. All right, so moving on to today's focus, what we're going to do today is we're going to dive into a couple of advisory opinions. And I think these are going to be pretty interesting because these are things we deal with on a day-to-day basis. This isn't just normal, USPAP requirements, but these are things that we think about every time that we perform an appraisal report. Today we're going to try to get through the first three advisory opinions: Advisory Opinion 1, Advisory Opinion 2, and Advisory Opinion 3. Advisory Opinion 1 deals with the sales history, which is something that I know that some of our reports lack on at times, but it's not necessarily just an issue with us. It's actually an issue that deals with appraisers all over the place. It's not just something within our firm. Advisory Opinion 2 deals with the inspection of the subject property, and Advisory Opinion 3, if we get into that, that's the updating of a prior appraisal report. All right, so the purpose of the advisory opinions, when you take a look at the advisory opinions, if you look in USPAP, there's actually 30 advisory opinions, but they go all the way up to number 38. And you'll notice that there's going to be some that are missing. I think 4, 5, and 6 are missing because those have been retired. So what they do is, instead of renumbering advisory opinions, they just delete the ones that are retired. So therefore, advisory opinion number 1 will always be advisory opinion number 1. Advisory opinion number 38 will always be advisory opinion number 38, even if advisory opinions 4, 5, and 6 are retired. And when I was reading through this, I thought it was kind of funny because it says, the purpose of the advisory opinions, they talk about that the communication of this communication by the Appraisal Standards Board does not establish new standards nor interpret existing standards. Advisory opinions are issued to illustrate the applicability of appraisal standards in specific situations and to offer advice from the ASB for the resolution of an appraisal issue and problem, which basically makes it seem like, they don't want to tell you how to solve the issue, but if they were going to tell you how to solve the issue, this might be an idea on what they would do. It's kind of like the beginning of the 14th edition of the Appraisal Institute, Appraisal of Real Estate, where they don't necessarily tell you that this is the guidebook, but it's if they actually wanted to take responsibility, this is what they would probably tell you to do. So going into the first advisory opinion, it basically deals with sales history. And the issue at hand is the Uniform Standards Professional Appraisal Practice does contain sales history requirements to obligate the appraisers of real estate to analyze and report pending and recent agreements, opinions, listings, and sales involving the subject property. Because of differences in federal law and regulations, state laws, and operating practices related to the disclosure of confidentiality in real estate sales data, the ways in which appraisers comply with the sales history requirements vary according to the jurisdiction and availability of information. The lack of consistency has raised questions regarding the applicability and relevance of the sales history requirements. However, we don't necessarily deal with that here. A lot of that comment deals with what's called non-disclosure states. I know Texas is one, but in the states that we deal with, most of the sales transactions are an item of public record. There are some states, though, where you're not required to, where recorded deeds are not a matter of public record. Therefore, it's a little harder getting some of that information. So luckily, we don't have to necessarily deal with that. When we look at the advisory opinion, as you know by now, the USPAP Rule 1-5 requires an appraiser, when the value opinions to be developed is market value and such information is available to the appraiser in the normal course of business, to analyze all agreements of sales, options, and listings of the subject's property current as of the effective date of the appraisal, to analyze all sales subject to the property within the last 3 years. Okay, so if the property is sold within the last 3 years, if it's been listed within the last 3 years, if there's an option on the property within the 3 years, we have to analyze it. Okay, and that's why the word analyze is important, because it doesn't matter if you're doing a restricted appraisal report or a regular appraisal report. It needs to be analyzed. You can't just, this is something where a summary or a statement where a statement of, the subject's been, the subject was listed on this date for this amount of money, that's not good enough. You actually have to perform the analysis, and you have to do that whether you're doing a restricted appraisal report or a full appraisal report. And this is something that USPAP is very explicit about because they want to make sure that this information is thoroughly analyzed. And I know that in our office, we actually go a little further from that. I know Tony said that he wants anything within 4 years to be fully analyzed. And remember, a lot of this information that's provided by USPAP is exactly that. They're minimum requirements. If the property sold 4 years ago and it's it's relevant, talk about it. If it sold 5 years ago and it's relevant, talk about it. More proof that USPAP sets only the minimum requirements is basically the USPAP does not specifically require that a report includes an affirmative statement regarding the lack of prior sales. However, it's often a client requirement to do so. We actually do that in our appraisal reports already. So where we talk about, to our knowledge, the subject properties have neither been listed for sale nor under agreement to be sold within 36 months preceding the effective date of this appraisal. USPAP actually does not require us to make that statement, but we do that anyway as clarification and to provide more information to our borrowers, and we're going to continue to do. And it's kind of what's considered a best business practice, because that's what our peers would do, and that's general market practice for what we're doing. So we're going to proceed. We're going to keep doing that moving forward. Certain examples of what not to do when you're discussing a previous sale or a previous listing of the subject property. Each of these items might actually sound like they're reasonable. However, they more or less represent statements and not analysis. And the first one is, the subject property is currently listed for sale at an asking price of $110,000 or $115,000 per MLS. The subject's been offered to the market for 110 days. The subject property is currently under agreement to be sold for a reported consideration of $2 million per MLS. The subject property was on the market for 568 days prior to going under contract. And per county public record, the subject property sold in July 2020 for a reported consideration of $250,000 as recorded in deed book 2427, page 200. Now, these are things where on the surface they seem like they're normal, but they're lacking. These are statements. All you're doing is just regurgitating information from an MLS sheet. USPAP requires us to go further. They require us now to take the next step. We need to talk about the sources of the information, and then we need to reconcile how that relates to the market value that we're concluding to within the appraisal report. Some examples of what to do if there's no contract or no listing. USPAP actually gives us an example that basically states as such: research of the applicable public records, private data services, which would be a mobile listing service, an interview with the current owner revealed that the subject property is not currently under agreement or option and is not offered for sale to the open market. Additionally, according to these sources, the subject property has not been transferred during the past 3 years. See, in this one, they went a little step further and they actually showed which research was done, what sources were consulted, public record, MLS, conversation with the owner. These are all things we should be doing anyway as part of our information gathering process. So we need to start doing, we have to be more cognizant, and we have to make sure that we're doing a better job of making sure that that gets in the report in that manner. Examples of what to do for active listings. The first one basically states, as of the effective date, the subject property is listed for sale for 112 days, originally listed at $369,900. The price was reduced to the current amount of $350 after 60 days on the market. Since the current listing prices of the comparable properties range between $342 and $359.9, the average marketing time of 90 days, the subject property appears to be, competitively priced. There, that shows that they went the extra step. They saw what the property's listed for, how long it's been on the market, see what current listings are listed for at the market, see what the current marketing time is, and we fall right within that range. Another example, if that's not the case, says as of the effective date, the subject property has been listed for sale for 174 days. Originally listed at 199,900. The price was reduced to a current level of 179 after 50 days on the market. Superior properties have listing prices under 179, and the average marketing time is only 40 days. Therefore, based on the information, they're making a reconciliation here. The subject property may experience longer marketing periods and further reductions in list price. And finally, the third example they give is the subject property is listed for $339. As of the effective date, it's been listed for 4 days. Based on comparisons with other current listings, subject appears to be superior to similarly priced properties. These these differences may result in quicker sale or buyers bidding up the price beyond the listing price. So you see 3 different examples here where the appraiser talked about the asking price, talked about how long it was on the market for, provided some sort of market evidence of what's going on in that market, and then also then reconciling where the subject would be in relation to the market. But there's also other examples of what we also do for active listings. And what else do we usually do? And this is something that is above and beyond the minimum requirements that are indicated through USPAP. But when we're appraising a property and the property's been listed for sale or is currently listed for sale, there should be no reason why we're not contacting the listing broker or the listing agent on the property if the property is listed for sale. There's no reason why we shouldn't be talking to the owner of the property if it's a FSBO or if the owner's marketing the property themselves. You get so much information out of a 5-minute long phone conversation with an agent that you never get just by reading the MLS sheet. A lot of times when I call an agent, I'll confirm with them how long the property's been on the market. Sometimes you'll look at an MLS sheet and you might just look at the most recent sheet, shows the property's been on the market for 10 days, but the property might have been listed just previously for 300 days prior to that, and it might be a stagnant listing. So you always want to confirm how long it's been on the market, how long they've had the listing. I also always ask basically how many showings have been on the property. If you look at the asking price, see what kind of interest has been generated. If there's been nobody looking at the property or nobody seeing the property, maybe it's a little high. If they're getting 10 listings a day, then you know that it's a pretty active market. Also ask what the feedback of those showings were. It's an easy question. You could say, oh yeah, well, the broker could turn around and say, yeah, we had 5 showings last week and we're expecting multiple offers. So then it's going to be competitive. That's going to support your analysis of that sale. Another question I usually always ask is not who the sales price was established, but how the sales price was established, especially if the property's been on the market for longer than what would be considered a typical marketing time. Especially with residential, I'm sure you guys have already run into these situations where a property's listed for sale and you talk to the broker, and the broker would indicate that the current sales price was predicated primarily based on what the owner of the property or the seller of the property wanted, and therefore that might be a little high. So they listed it, and they're expecting to have some sort of meeting with the buyer to discuss a reduction, and ask their opinion if they believe that adjustment to the asking price may be warranted in the future. And one thing we need to realize, guys, is talking to the agents and talking to the brokers, they're a wealth of knowledge, and we should definitely use their knowledge to our benefit. As appraisers, we cover all of southeastern Pennsylvania, southern New Jersey. Some of us on the commercial end cover multiple states and the entire eastern Pennsylvania and all of South Jersey. Whereas these brokers and these agents generally, especially residentially, they specialize in neighborhoods and really and have a lot of strong knowledge within their submarket. So even though we may be in a certain neighborhood once or twice a month or once every few months, these agents and these brokers are in these markets, they eat, breathe, live, sleep these markets. So always use their knowledge. And a lot of times, Tony used to tell me this all the time, and he's absolutely right. Sometimes if you talk to the right broker, they, and you mention to them that you've seen their name on a lot of listings in the neighborhood, they'll be more than happy to give you all the information that you would want to know about a market. And basically, you can have your market section written up just from a couple conversations with a couple of the local brokers. Examples of what to do for pending sales. One of the examples is that some of the properties currently under agreement to sell for $525,000. It's been listed for sale at $535,000 for 107 days prior to the contract. The contract provided to the appraiser contains no atypical terms or conditions. There were no reported seller's concessions. This appears to be an arm's length transaction. Second, another example would be that subject properties under agreement to sell for $525,000. It's been marketed for sale at $535,000 for 107 days prior to the contract. The contract provided to the appraiser indicates the provision to the seller to retain possible possession of the premises for 30 days after the closing. In effect, the buyer is making a concession approximately equivalent to 1 month's rent. Otherwise, there's no atypical terms or conditions. There are no reported seller concessions. This appears to be an arm's length transaction, assuming that the parties were acting in their own best interest per definition of market value. The price was likely affected by the concession. And then the third one talks about same property, subjects under agreement for $525,000. It was listed at $535,000 for 107 days prior to the contract. The contract provided to the appraiser contains no atypical terms or conditions. The contract states that the seller will pay 2% of the sales price, $10,500, towards the buyer's closing costs. This appears to be an arm's length transaction, assuming the parties were acting in their own best interest per definition of market value. The price was likely affected by the concession. Okay, so when you're reviewing a pending sales contract, you can mention whether there's any concessions. You can mention whether there's any atypical financing. Most of the time, it's going to be a normal market arm's length transaction. This is one that we generally do pretty well in our office because we will have access most of the time to sales agreements. We'll be able to review those sales agreements, see if there's any underlying issues, contact the buyers, see if there's any issues, maybe even talk to the sellers or an agent involved. Usually when it's a pending sale, we kind of have a good amount of information because we're provided a lot of that information as part of the information gathering process. All right. Okay, but there are some cases where what happens if nobody's willing to give you a copy of that sales contract? Sometimes it really does happen more often than you think, because there's a lot of times, especially in commercial appraising, where you might have a buyer and seller that are negotiating the sales price, and they may turn around and say, okay, well, let's go get the property appraised, and what the property appraises at is what we'll sell the property for. I've seen that happen multiple times, over my years of being an appraiser. But if you're ever in a situation where you can't get a copy of the sales contract during the course of normal business, you don't have to let that hold up the job. What you do need to do, though, is you need to indicate in the report what actions were taken to attempt to receive the information during the course of normal business. And, you might come back with a comment as such. The property being appraised is known to be the subject of a pending purchase and sales agreement, but the appraiser is unable to obtain the terms of the contract. The current owner confirmed that the property is under contract to sell, but declined to disclose the details of the agreement. Sometimes you have this happen also when you're trying to confirm sales comps. and you're using a pending sale. And a lot of times the brokers won't give you the actual contract information while the property's still, in escrow. So you can explain that, and then you make your adjustments off of the last list price. Whereas here, if they're not willing to give you the contract, or if the contract's not finalized yet, because the contract is the contract's going to be subject based on the outcome of the appraisal. Make sure you discuss that within your appraisal assignment, within the analysis of the sales history and the listing history. All right. Are there any questions so far dealing with sales history?
No, I think we're good. I'm good.
Okay. Senior, Scott. All right. All right. Then secondly, we move into advisory opinion number 2. And this basically talks about the inspection of the subject property. And a lot of times, depending on how long you've been in the business, sometimes you get into a normal flow of what it is that you look for when you do an inspection. And this first part is going to talk about, what is an inspection, what do we do on an inspection, and then basically what USPAP's requirements as it pertains to inspections are. And the issue as part of the advisory opinion is for real estate appraisal assignments, USPAP requires the report to contain a certification indicating whether the subject property was personally inspected by the appraisers. And certain questions that that are asked in this advisory opinion is: what is the purpose of inspecting the subject property? What constitutes a personal inspection? Does USPAP mandate a minimum level of property inspection? What are my obligations if I rely upon an inspection of a property performed by somebody else, which is actually a growing trend in the industry? And what are the disclosure obligations relating to the inspection? So the first question is, what's the purpose of inspecting the subject property? This should be pretty, self-explanatory. The primary reason, according to USPAP, for inspecting the subject property is to gather information about the characteristics of the property that's relative to its value. So basically, your inspection is mainly to gather information. Okay? In Advisory Opinion 23, they talk a little bit more about the identification of relative property relative characteristics of the subject property. And these are things where, from our earliest days as a trainee and moving up through your careers, you're always going to re-examine to yourself, well, what are those things we're looking for? I know sometimes you get into a certain routine, and I'm not going to say that it's a certain rut, but you go into a house and first thing you do is you go in the basement, you look at the electrical box, you look at ceilings, walls, floors, go up to the second floor, work your way from the front of the house to the back, living room, dining room, kitchen, drywall, hardwood, what appliances are there, up into the living room, into the bedrooms, how many bathrooms, sketch it out, draw it out real quick, and then you're out of there in about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But these are things where, as you're always growing in this business, you need to always have your head on the swivel and looking for the things that might be unexpected that you might run into when you're at a certain property, especially if it's not your cookie cutter straight through or your cookie cutter airlight when you're doing some of these appraisals. In Advisory Opinion 23, they really talk about the difference. And one thing that I want you guys to take out of this lesson today is knowing the difference between real estate and real property. These terms are usually are sometimes used interchangeably, although there is a significant difference. And these are things you're going to need to know for your licensing exams, and these are things that you're going to need in the back of your head when you're doing these appraisals. For the rest of your career. And the main difference is that the real estate talks about the physical attribute, mainly the physical attributes of the subject, Real estate is the land and the improvements. That's basically what I call the bricks, sticks, and dirt. Real property also includes the property rights. That's why when sometimes if a property's, if a property is has an above market or a below market lease, that might have a effect on the value of the real property, because the real property, the property is all, and the way I remember is property also deals with property interest. That's when you're dealing with the fee simple or the lease fee or the leasehold or the life estates that, we don't run into often, but, we do run into them periodically. Next is, what is a personal inspection? And, it might sound like a silly question, but, while there's other ways to gather information from the subject property about the subject property's relative characteristics, in many cases, the personal observation of the appraiser are the primary source of information gathering regarding the subject. And here's something that has been, talked about within our office and within the industry over the last several years. Our main goal as appraisers, right, is to not mislead anybody and not have anybody misinterpret what we're talking about when we're appraising the property or when we're describing the property. But for years, we've always used the term inspection when we talk about our site visits or our observations of the subject property. And as other professionals have marketed their service as building inspectors or home inspectors, there has been times where the intended user or their clients may misinterpret what our version of an inspection is. And so basically, we always have to be aware that the level of the inspection that's performed by an appraiser is different from the level of the inspection that's performed by another professional, either a home inspector, general contractor, etc. Therefore, it's now common practice, and I've been trying to do this for the last several years, is to basically reterm our inspections as physical observations or site visits. Therefore, it avoids confusion. Especially if we're doing an appraisal for a homeowner who wants to know what his house is worth, and we're saying we're going to come over and we're going to do an inspection of his house, we don't want them to misinterpret that as a home inspection, because we're not checking the air conditioning unit. We're not testing the electrical outlets. We might turn the water on, and if the house is vacant on the lockbox, we may turn the water on to see if it's running. We may flip a light switch to see if the utilities are turned on. But other than that, we're really doing more of just a site visit and a physical observation as opposed to an actual inspection of the house. And the next section when we go into is when we're doing a personal inspection, what are we really there to see? And what information are we there to gather? And actually, I'm not going to have a discussion right now. All right, so what are we there to see? And what information are we there to gather? When we go and do the inspection, what do we generally do? We figure out the building size, right? I'm sure everybody on this call has some sort of measuring device in their car, whether it's a wheel or a tape measure or a laser measure. The lack of response makes me very confident to know that everybody does.
I got a nice wheel.
Which is good. So yeah, everybody should have a wheel. Everybody should have maybe one day we'll eventually get into the I think my next investment might be in some sort of laser measure, because I hear they're getting a lot better and they're a lot easier to use. So I might invest in one to see if that helps me speed up the measurement process at all. And a lot of times when we go out there now, we're even just confirming, because if you're doing something in Bucks County or Montgomery County, a lot of those public records now have footprint sketches that are available. And I always, as a rule of thumb, I always try to print that out before I go out there. And I'll, take my wheel and I'll start measuring, when I'm walking around taking my pictures, I'll walk around and also do a quick measurement. And if I'm within a foot, or if I'm fairly close to what the public record says, then you're basically kind of confirming some of that information. Also, when you're out the property, you're also figuring out the finishes, right? You're looking at the condition of the property. You're looking and seeing the utilities and the mechanicals, mainly to make sure that they're sufficient for the use. We go out there and we talk about the upgrades. If we see anything that's good about the property. We also see things that are that might be bad about the property. If there's any deferred maintenance, if you're looking at the ceiling and there's watermarks, if you're looking at the carpet and it's the floor's a little squishy in a certain area. Any complementary or adverse conditions. One of the reasons we go out and we do these inspections is to use all 5 of our senses. We go out to the property and we try to get a feel for it, and we try to see how a typical purchaser would react to that property if they were to potentially buy the property. Can the information we gather be internal and external to the subject? Yeah, again, when you go out to the property, you can take a look at a house in Levittown, walk out into the backyard, and maybe from the street scene not be able to tell that there's power lines that are 15 feet high off the ground running across the backyard. Well, that's going to be an external condition that you're going to need to know. And you're going to need to know whether your sales are going to have those same sort of, external factors. If you're doing a property in Pottstown and you've never been to Pottstown before, and you look down the street and you see a big smokestack from the nuclear power plant, does that have an effect on the value of the property? And it may not, because your comparables that you use may all be from the same neighborhood and they may all have the same external factors. Well, you need to be aware of that. And the final thing we always try to consider now when we go out and we do our properties is what about the SWOT? The strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That really shouldn't be, and I know I've had a conversation with a lot of you guys about this, and I know Tony has as well. This really shouldn't be something that is thought about when you're sitting at the desk, behind your computer writing up the appraisal report. This should be something that you should be thinking of as you're driving to the property, as you're entering the neighborhood, as you're arriving at the house, as you are, and I know I'm focusing this a lot on residential, but as when you're walking into the apartment building, when you're walking into the industrial building, when you're walking into the retail building, what's the strengths? What are some weaknesses you see? What are some opportunities? If you're walking through the property and it's 3 stories and the second, third stories are shells and everything else around it has apartments on the second and third floors, well, you could think, hey, if I was buying this property, there's an upside here, right? I could probably fit these units out. I could probably put some apartments in here. There's some upside to this property, or what's some threats? Well, maybe it's in a neighborhood where doing something like that would be speculative, and there might not be a whole lot. The reason why they probably haven't done it already is because there's not a whole lot of demand for apartments in a certain neighborhood, and maybe it might be some time before you could fully realize that upside. That could be a threat. Or a weakness. So these are all things that should be going through your head as you're going through the property, as you're arriving at the property, while you're at the property, and when you're leaving the property, as opposed to just get in the property, get in the basement, get in the first floor, get upstairs, take your photos, measure the building, and be on to the next inspection. And these are all things that over time you're going to be able to do while you're doing those things. But it's just, kind of keeping your eyes open a little bit more, keep the blinders off, keep your head on a swivel, and try to observe a little bit more when we're out at the properties. And that's something I always try to, I'm still working on trying to get better at that. And the next question, I'm going to open that up to anybody who wants to try to answer it. What is the minimum level of inspection required under USPAP? Anybody? Anybody? There you go, Youssef. I saw Youssef take his microphone off first, so he can answer it. Do you not have a microphone, Youssef? Probably doesn't. All right, Rob. What's that, Dom?
There's not a minimum. You can just see it from photos, right? And do a drive-by.
What do you think, Dom?
Does it depend on the client's needs or your scope of work?
Okay, the answer is nothing. USPAP actually has no inspection requirement. So you guys are both kind of right. But one is often conducted. It generally is best practices. And Dom was right when he was talking about the intended. It's also important to know what is required to satisfy the intended use, as we talked about in the last extravaganza, when we talked about what creates a credible assignment result, and the credibility is based on the intended use. And just because we're able to do a drive-by or a desktop appraisal, we have the technology to do so, does that meet the client's need to solve their appraisal problem? And we learned that a lot during COVID, where we couldn't get into some of these properties, and we're like, well, yeah, it's easy, let's just do a drive-by. But then a lot of these lenders were coming back to us and saying, well, unfortunately, we can't do a drive-by because the bank isn't permitted to write this loan or renew the loan predicated on an exterior-only inspection. So there's a difference between what we're physically able to do and what the bank or the client would need us to do in order to solve their appraisal problem. So that's why it was always, we always go in there, we always try to, do the full inspection as the property was ordered, or as the appraisal was ordered. And then for some reason, if we can't get in there, that's when we take our normal course of action. We go back to Michelle, we go back to Karen, they let the client know, and then we let the client then go ahead and make that decision. When the client makes that decision, they can say, okay, good, we're in the parameters, we can get by with a drive-by. Awesome, we can do that. But what we can't do is make that decision for them and wind up giving them a product that they're not able to use because they can't lend money on a property based on an exterior only or a desktop appraisal. So that's something that we need to know from a better business standpoint or best business practices standpoint. But when it comes to USPAP, you're right. There is no specific requirement when it comes to an inspection. However, what USPAP does require is that you have to disclose if the property was inspected and to what extent the property was inspected. So you don't have to inspect it, but you have to disclose if you did not, and you have to disclose if you did. And then you have to disclose whether it was an inspection from the street, if it's an exterior only inspection, but you were able to get onto the property. If it was an interior and exterior inspection, these are things that need to be disclosed. And actually, this also goes for every appraiser signing the certification. So when you have multiple appraisers signing the certification, it is absolutely common for one appraiser to say, well, yes, I inspected the property, but a co-signing appraiser did not. That's okay. It happens. A lot of times, that's the course of business, where I'll inspect the property, but Tony will be signing it or Senior will be signing it, and they didn't inspect the property. That's absolutely permitted, and that's absolutely, that's fine. There are multiple common inspection methods. Just to kind of give a brief overview of what is found, in the marketplace. There are times where clients will resort to a desktop appraisal where there is no inspection required. There's times before where we've done exterior only inspections, which are also known as drive-bys. Even though you're technically supposed to get out of the car, you're supposed to walk around the area. That's why when you're taking your pictures, you don't want the frame of your window in there. You don't want your mirror in there. You want it. You want to, just because it's exterior only, don't get caught up by the term, the slang term drive-by. You actually should be getting out of your car, walking around the property. If it's a corner property and you can get around the back and take a rear photo, you're supposed to do those things. It's not just, take a picture out of your car while you're going 20 miles an hour past the property. Then there's the normal conventional interior exterior observation. Then there's also third-party appraisals or third-party inspections, which are now starting to gain in popularity. And if you've ever heard the term bifurcated appraisal, that's basically what they're talking about, is where you're actually hiring an outside person or a third party to go do the inspection and the site visit, and you stay in the office, you gather the information, and then you use that to write the report. The opinions of that go all over the gamut, from people who are adamantly opposed to it to people who are all for it. If you guys listen to the Appraisal Coach podcast that Tony sends out all the time, I know that guy, Dustin Harris, he's actually a big proponent of bifurcated appraisals, because he's of the mindset that if somebody specializes in doing property observations, they tend to catch more, they tend to be more thorough, and a lot of times they wind up doing it, if all they're doing is property inspections, they tend to wind up being a little, sometimes even better than some appraisers can actually go. So, it's basically how, what your mindset is and what you think, is important. And ultimately, you need to make sure that no matter which inspection option we're asked to perform, or which one the client is satisfied with us performing, and which one we're able to perform, we always need to make sure that we have enough information that we're able, that we're able to gather enough information in order to arrive at a credible value conclusion. And then probably the last one was one that I dealt with quite a bit during COVID. You can have a combination of all of the of any of the other inspection methods. There were times during the lockdowns where we were provided with property condition reports that were done by third parties, and then they still wanted me to go out and do an exterior only observation of the property, and it wasn't from a public street. They actually wanted me to go on site. They wanted me to walk around the property. They wanted me to measure the property. They wanted me to do everything I would have done, as if it was a full appraisal. However, they just excused me from having to walk inside the building, while we were in a shutdown. So, it was really a combination of an interior exterior inspection without actually going inside the building. I was doing all the same site work I was doing as if it was an interior property, but I was just getting the interior information from a very thorough property condition report that was provided to us by the lender. But as we mentioned before, remember, we don't make the final call. The client does when it comes to the inspection method. And, we need to remember that it's basically because we have to, appraise the property and provide them a report that's going to meet the intended use. And just because we can do a desktop or a drive-by appraisal doesn't mean that the client can accept a desktop or a drive-by appraisal. Any questions so far? All right. Finally, comments about third-party inspections and relying on somebody else performing the appraisal or the site visit. In some cases, client may provide the appraiser with the results of an inspection provided by a third party, or the appraiser may hire a third party to perform the inspections. Whether the inspection is performed by the appraiser, another person, or a third party, an appraiser must ensure the degree of the inspection is sufficient for the appraiser to understand the subject property's relevant characteristics, so the appraiser can develop a credible appraisal report. So therefore, going through here, I think there's a lot of the same stuff we were talking about before. Therefore, in cases where the appraiser relies on a third-party inspector's report, it may be necessary to obtain additional information or examine other documents in order to understand the relevant characteristics. So basically what they're saying is you don't need just the property condition report that's given by a third party in order to get all the characteristics you need. You may also look at prior public MLS listings. You may look at public record. You may deal with an interview with an owner where they may provide you with photos or maybe even a FaceTime walkthrough we've been seeing at times. So there's really, USPAP sets a very low bar on what's required for the inspection, but yet the low bar, because of technology, really gives us a wide range of how we gather that information. And most of the time where they say that, you should use it, modify the assignment conditions to the scope of work, if you're not able to get all the information, use an extraordinary assumption or withdraw from the assignment. Just as a, better business practice, I think whenever you're getting information about a property that's, that you're not getting it as the primary source through a property inspection, I would always recommend using an extraordinary assumption, because you would have to make the assumption that the information given to you from somebody else is correct. And the one little discussion that we're going to have is the illustration that's given at the end of the advisory opinion, basically stating that I've been asked to appraise a single unit property based on an exterior only inspection from the street. What are my development and reporting obligations? I want to hear from somebody else other than Dom and Rob, because I've already heard from those two already. Carrie just said she lost her network connection, so we're not going to hear from her.
But
I'm sorry, was that Dom?
I don't know who else has a microphone.
Oh, okay. Well, that's actually okay. Well, that makes sense then. All right. So I guess all right. So no, that works. All right. So Rob and Dom, let's hear a couple ideas about what your development and reporting obligations are when it comes to doing an exterior only inspection.
I mean, you have to disclose that it's an exterior inspection, obviously. Okay. And then really, I mean, it's just based on the needs of the client is just kind of.
You have anything to add, Dom?
I don't understand the question. I guess I don't really understand what they're asking.
Well, basically for the last 10 minutes, we've been discussing the development and reporting obligations of what you need to be able to get for the inspection.
So I agree with what Rob said. You disclose what you saw from the exterior only inspection, unless you got inside or got pictures of the inside.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Well, no, those are definitely some good points. Here in the information that I threw up there, it was first, make sure that the client's okay with any change in the level of the inspection, that and that the level performed will be satisfied and meet the intended use of the assignment. You gather the information on relative property characteristics. You always have to make sure in your report that you cite the data sources. You got to make sure that you indicate where each of the information came from, and they can come from multiple sources. You also need to ensure that you're able to obtain enough information to result in a credible value conclusion, and then disclose the level of the inspection performed and all sources of all data used within the appraisal report. So basically, make sure that the level of the inspection is going to meet the client's needs and solve their appraisal problem. Then you're going to gather the information. You need to cite the sources, and then you need to make sure that you need to make sure that the information is sufficient enough to come up with a valuable conclusion. And then you wrap that all up by making sure that you convey that information to the client and the intended users within their appraisal report. All right, and we got about 3 more minutes, which is perfect, because advisory opinion number 3, it's actually not that. I wanted to throw that at the end to just kind of be some filler if we if we needed a couple more minutes, because it's not really that thorough. And advisory opinion number 3 basically talks about the update of prior appraisal. If you haven't yet, you're going to have times during your career where you're going to have somebody ask you for an update. You're like, I need an update of an appraisal. I need an update of an appraisal. And just like self-contained and summary and limited and complete, the update is a term that's been basically antiquated. There is no such thing as a update. A lot of times we'll also hear the term recertification. So you'll hear updates or recertification of value. And the first thing you need to know as appraisers, because we're the experts when it comes to the terminology, is to have clarification of the terminology. And the only time in USPAP when you're dealing with something called a recertification of value is generally when you're asked to confirm whether or not a condition of a prior appraisal report has been met. So a lot of times we will do appraisal reports subject to, and we'll do prospective valuations of properties upon completion of a renovation or upon completion of new construction. And we'll be doing the appraisal in November, and they'll say that we anticipate that the work's going to be done in June. So in June, the client may call you back and say, hey, we just contacted the borrower, everything's done, property's complete, we need you to go out and do a recertification of value. And basically what you're doing is you're going out to the property, you're taking some photos for them, you're being their eyes and ears, and you're basically confirming that the information that they gave you and the information that you predicated your value on was basically how the property was done. And if it was done based on the plans and specifications that we made in our extraordinary assumption in the original appraisal report, and the effective date doesn't change, then basically you're recertifying that the conditions of that prior appraisal have been met. However, if the client comes to you and says, hey, Elwin, you appraised this property for me 2 years ago. I need an update on the appraisal just to make sure that the property value hasn't gone down since the last time you were out there. Well, that's not an update, and that's not a recertification of value. That is actually a new appraisal assignment, and that's expressly indicated in USPAP. And regardless of the nomenclature used, when a client seeks a more current value of an analysis of a property that was the subject of a prior appraisal, this is not an extension of that prior appraisal assignment that was already completed. It's simply a new assignment, and it meets all the criteria of a new assignment. We do disclose if it was within the last 36 months. You disclose that you did a prior assignment. When you're doing the development requirements, I think my record for the time that I appraised one property 2 times for different clients was about 10 days. And it was a beer distributor out in Pottstown. And I finished the appraisal report, and 10 days later we were asked by another lender to do the appraisal on the same property, and we went ahead and did that. When it comes to the development requirements, the scope of work in the new assignment can be different than the scope of work in the prior assignment. So either if somebody's looking for a liquidation value, whereas one person's looking for a market value, you can do that. If somebody's, and also they're saying that basically the appraiser is permitted to incorporate some of the analysis from the previous assignment into the new assignment, and you can do that through the use of an extraordinary assumption, or you can do that in a couple other ways. You can, and this is the final point. When you're performing an appraisal for on a property that you've recently appraised, most of the time we're appraising the property for the same client. It's possible that we appraise the property now, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, their loan comes for a renewal. They come back to have the property reappraised, and we can do what's called an incorporation by reference, where I've seen before, we've done an appraisal, we disclose we did an appraisal within the last 3 years, we disclose we did the appraisal for the same client within the last 3 years, and we're assuming that they still have custody of that prior appraisal report. So therefore, our appraisal report that we're giving may be restricted to the point where it might not have to have all the a lot of the same information that we would put into a full appraisal report. And that's basically the requirements of USPAP. But as I mentioned before, general business practices always tend to supersede and exceed USPAP. That's why USPAP is we talk about it all the time, is the bare minimum. So even though USPAP says you can actually staple a copy of the prior appraisal report to your new appraisal report and submit it, as part of business practices, you wouldn't want to do that if you're doing the appraisal for a different client, because there's a lot of confidential information that might be in the original appraisal report that you may not be able to disclose to the second client. So as part of business, best business practices, we usually exceed that, and we go ahead and we actually pull the information from one report to the other, and we create what would be considered a self-sufficient or sufficient appraisal report to be able to stand on its own. Even though the requirements of USPAP say that you're permitted to do something less than that, we generally won't in this office. And then basically, the confidentiality rules. That's one of the reasons why you don't, reference or you don't do a incorporation by attachment for a prior appraisal, especially if it's from a different client, because there's a lot of information that might have been considered confidential in the first appraisal report that you would not be able to disclose in the second appraisal report. So that's why it's always, a better business practice to kind of start new, use the information you can use from the prior appraisal report, but always put it in the, as much information as you can within the new appraisal report. And then in your record keeping rule, basically all record keeping rules apply. If you're using any parts of a prior appraisal work file within your new appraisal work file, you're going to need to keep a copy of that information in your new work file as well. Or you're going to need to document in your work file where you can find that information and where you can get access to that information. All right, guys, do we have any questions?
Think we're good.
All right. Hey, guys, thank you so much for coming by today. I appreciate the fact that we were able to get this done early, and now you guys have the rest of your day to do your scheduled work. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to give me a call, email me. And if I don't see a lot of you, I hope you all have a very happy Thanksgiving, and I look forward to next month's meeting. Talk to y'all soon.
Awesome. You do the same, Walt. Thank you.